Welcome, everybody, to our Provo Municipal Council work meeting. It is Tuesday, January 17th, 2023 at 1:35 p.m. Meetings of the Municipal Council are being held in hybrid fashion. That is, members of the public can view council meetings on YouTube and Facebook, or they may attend in person at Provo City Hall. I'll remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast. I am George Handley, Council Chair. I'm joined on the dais by Vice Chair Councilor McKay, Councilor Ellsworth, Councilor Shipley, and Councilor Fillmore, with Councilors Whipple and Hoban excused. I neglected to request a volunteer for an opening prayer. I'm wondering if I can call upon Rachel Breen to offer that. Thank you.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so very thankful for all the things thou hast given us, especially for the rain and the snow that we've had recently. And please bless that we may have thy spirit with us as we make these decisions for the city of Provo. We say these things in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called upon by the chair. It is proposed we approve the following minutes: December 13th, 2022 work meeting, January 10th, 2023 work meeting, July 26th, 2022 council meeting, August 9th, 2022 council meeting, September 20th council meeting, October 4th council meeting, and December 13th council meeting, all in 2022. Are there any objections or requested changes to these minutes? Seeing none, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. We'll start with item number 1, which is a presentation reviewing the dispatch services agreement between Provo City and Orem City. This will be presented by Wayne Parker, CAO, and John Borgett, Administrative Services Director.
Thank you for the opportunity to give you an update. We are nearing the end of these updates, so that's a good story. Since we last met, we have welcomed a number of new employees into our Provo Dispatch Center. On December 25th, the dispatch professionals that were working for the city of Orem became Provo City employees. And so the dispatch center is now functionally consolidated between Provo and Orem. We are now working on the final agreement, kind of getting drafts back and forth. We provided to you in the packet today the draft as of last Thursday, and I'll highlight one change we expect to make to that before you receive the final agreement for approval in 2 weeks. So to give you a quick update, again, the center is functioning well. We're excited about the changes that have occurred. We think it's a significant net positive for both Provo and Orem cities and our residents. You will have before you 2 weeks from tonight the final dispatch services agreement. And again, it will be substantially, I think with only maybe one minor change, essentially equivalent to what we provided to you in the packet. And again, I'm happy to run through that with you. We've talked in principle about all of the provisions of the agreement as it currently exists. We'll also have for you, following a public hearing in 2 weeks on the 31st, a revision to our fiscal 23 annual budget, which will essentially change the budget for the remaining 6 months of this fiscal year to incorporate both the expenditures and the revenues associated with bringing Orem into the equation. So that's where we currently are. Let me just highlight the one proposed change, and it was requested by Orem, and actually we thought it was a really good idea. So on page 5, I think, of the agreement, maybe 6. No, on the bottom of page 5, where we talk about the essentially how the budget will be allocated between the cities. 50% of the budget, essentially the budget will be split in half. 50% of the cost will be allocated based on population of areas served. So that means basically Provo's population compared to Orem, Linden, and Vineyard, who all receive dispatch services currently from the city of Orem, now from the city of Provo. And the second half will be based on calls for service, again, from those same sets of populations. We put in the original agreement because we were still kind of working on exactly how to do an apples to apples comparison on the calls for service numbers. And so in the agreement, we basically said calls for service would be defined by the advisory board. The advisory board has been meeting informally and has come up with a call for service definition, which we think is fair to both cities. We've run that by all of the public safety officials in both cities, and they're comfortable with that agreement, that definition. We provided that last Wednesday to the Orem City Attorney's Office for their final review. We expect we're going to get word back today or tomorrow on that definition change, and then we'll incorporate that into subsection 3.2 on the bottom of page 5 of the agreement. But other than that, we think the agreement is pretty well in final form. And so really today is just designed to give you a status report, let you have a kind of first look at the agreement, and then our intention is to bring this back for two actions then next on the 31st. One would be to authorize the mayor to execute the agreement, and then the second is to amend the budget to include the new revenue and expenditures associated with the consolidation. So that's really all I have to report. If you'd like some information on how the consolidation is going, Chief Miguel is here, and if you have any specific budget questions, John Borgett would be probably the person to go to for that. And I'm happy, or Brian's been very involved in our discussions as well with Orem in terms of the substance of the agreement. So any questions we can answer for you today?
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I'm just curious about how, I'm not sure how to say this. Orem's had some changes recently, and do they have a interim city manager or deputy city manager right now?
They have an acting city manager. Yeah, and we've copied him, Bren Bybee, and we've copied him on all of the correspondence. We did actually do a work session with the Orem City Council a few weeks ago, and they were all systems go. And so I don't expect there to be any challenges, with final action by Orem. Theirs will happen, I think, at the first meeting in February with the Orem City Council. So again, we've not heard any negative feedback at all from Orem City officials, administrative or elected.
Any other questions? All right. Thank
Okay.
you so much, Mr. Parker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borgett, Chief, Brian, for all your work on that. Okay, we'll move on then to item number 2, which is a presentation regarding annual council training. This is going to be presented by our City Attorney, Brian Jones, and Council Trainer.
Thank you, Chair Handley.
Yes.
For our first training, and I'll stand at the podium in a minute when we're done, but for the Open Meetings Act, just to shake things up a little bit, since you've heard my presentation a few times in a row now, we're going to watch the video that the State Auditor's Office has prepared for other public agencies. It's not as entertaining as I am, but I'm kidding. But
nothing is as entertaining as you.
But it'll give you a different version of the same thing. So we'll start with that video, and then I'll come to the podium and answer questions and do the grandma training.
So what is the Open and Public Meetings Act? It's the state law that ensures government actions and deliberations are openly conducted. Before we continue, keep in mind that this video is an overview and exceptions may exist based on your entity type. We focus on local government, not state requirements. When in doubt, read the law and consult with your legal counsel. So what's considered an open and public meeting? It's when a public body quorum, also known as a simple majority, meets to discuss or act upon government business. It includes the meetings sometimes referred to as workshops or executive sessions. Regular meetings, public hearings, electronic meetings, and emergency meetings are all open and public meetings. Open and public meetings don't include chance or social meetings. A public hearing is a type of open and public meeting where citizens have a reasonable opportunity to speak. Public hearings happen when a government adopts a budget, imposes or increases taxes or fees, or transfers money from an enterprise fund. These meetings have extra notice and posting requirements and won't be addressed in this video. An electronic meeting is a type of open and public meeting that's convened electronically, such as via phone or the internet. Remember, the governing body must adopt a resolution, rule, or ordinance allowing and governing electronic meetings. OPMA adds additional requirements too. An emergency meeting may be held to discuss an urgent matter due to unforeseen circumstances. In order to hold the meeting, the best notice that's feasible is provided of the time, location, and topics to be considered. An attempt is made to contact all governing body members, and a governing body majority approves the meeting. An open and public meeting may be closed to discuss any of the following: a person's character, competence, or health, collective bargaining, litigation, certain real property transactions, including any form of a water right or water shares, with specific restrictions, security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, investigations of criminal misconduct, and private or protected information per the Utah Procurement Code, including trade secrets. A closed meeting may be held only if a quorum is present and the meeting was properly noticed. 2/3 of the governing body present at the meeting need to vote yes to close a meeting. Quick math lesson. 2 divided by 3 equals 66.7%. Let's say your governing body has 5 members present at the meeting. If 3 out of 5 members vote yes, that equals 60%. Which is not equal or greater than 66.7%, which means you're 1 member short and would need 4 out of 5 members to vote yes. During a closed meeting, a governing body can't interview someone applying to fill an elected position, discuss filling a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, discuss the character, competence, or health of a person whose name was submitted for consideration to fill a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, approve any ordinance, resolution, rule, regulation, contract, or appointment, or take a vote, unless it's a vote on a motion to end the closed portion of the meeting and return to an open meeting. When a governing body closes a meeting, the following must be publicly announced and entered into the minutes of the open meeting at which the closed meeting was approved. The reason or reasons for holding the closed meeting, the location where the closed meeting will be held, and the vote of each member of the governing body either for or against the motion to close the meeting. If a closed meeting is discussing a person's character, competence, or health, or security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, or several other exceptions, mostly related to state bodies or project entities, no recording or minutes are required. However, the presiding member needs to sign a sworn written statement stating such. If the closed meeting is held for any other reason, a recording must be made, which includes date, time, and place of the meeting, names of members present and absent, and names of all others, except where disclosure would infringe on the confidentiality necessary to fulfill the original purpose of closing the meeting. Regular open and public meetings require 24 hours notice. The public notice includes the meeting agenda, date, time, and place. Public meeting agendas need to include reasonably specified topics to be considered, with each topic listed under a separate agenda item on the meeting agenda. The governing body may not consider a topic in an open meeting that wasn't on the agenda. If a new topic not on the agenda is raised by the public during an open meeting, the governing body may discuss the topic. However, final action may not be taken on the new topic during that meeting. Additionally, entities holding regular meetings scheduled in advance over the course of the year need to provide annual notice of the entire year's meeting schedule. The notice must include date, time, and place for each meeting. Notice is posted at the entity's principal office, or if the entity doesn't have a main office, at the building where the meeting will be held, and the Utah Public Notice website. Typically, posting on the Public Notice website is done by the records officer, recorder, or clerk. However, it's the governing body's responsibility to ensure notice is provided. State Archives has prepared a training manual and quick guide for owners and posters, as well as training videos that can be accessed at their website, archives.utah.gov. Written minutes and a recording are kept of all open meetings, with few exceptions. Written minutes include the date, time, and place of the meeting, the names of members present and absent, the substance of all matters, names of citizens providing comments, the substance of the comments provided, any information a body member requests be entered into the minutes or recording, and a record by individual member of each vote taken. A body with elected members must record each vote in list format by category for each action taken by a member, including yes votes, no votes, and absent members next to each member's name. A recording must be a complete and unedited record of all open portions of the meeting from beginning to end, and be labeled with the meeting date, time, and place. All or any part of an open meeting may be independently recorded by any person in attendance if the recording does not interfere with the conduct of the meeting. Pending minutes means written minutes of an open meeting in draft form subject to change before being approved by the public body that held the open meeting. Pending minutes must contain a clear indication, such as a draft or pending watermark, that the governing body hasn't yet approved the minutes, and that the minutes are subject to change until the public body approves them. Approved minutes means written minutes of an open meeting approved by the public body that held the open meeting. Entities must establish and implement procedures for the public body's approval of written minutes. Public meeting pending minutes, approved minutes, and recordings are public records under GRAMA. Any individual who publicly presents information relating to an item on the public body's meeting agenda must provide a copy of the information for inclusion in the public record. Make pending minutes available to the public within 30 days. Within 3 business days after approving written minutes of an open meeting, make approved minutes and any public materials available at the Utah Public Notice website, the entity's primary office, and the entity's website. Within 3 business days after holding an open meeting, make an audio recording of the open meeting available to the public for listening.
I don't know, Brian, that's going to be tough to beat.
I was going to say, although I'm sure that when I do the training, I talk for more than 8 minutes, that seems like a lot longer than 8 minutes when I'm watching it. But I did review my slide deck before sending the video over, and I don't think there's anything in there that we don't normally cover other than the remedial math lesson. And I don't think there's anything that we don't normally cover, but if there are any questions about the Open Meetings Act or the presentation, I'd be happy to answer those first. No. Okay,
Good.
We'll go on to grandma then.
Oh,
Yes.
I always said grandma. Other people say grandma. What's going on here?
I don't think that it has a pronunciation guide after the term in the statute, so
So I'm saying
It's-
it right.
voir dire or voir dire, right? At least it's not Latin. Yeah, I think there's probably different ways to say it, so we'll go with yours. All right, so this presentation is about the Government Records and Access Management Act. The slide deck here is actually adapted from a training that was given to the municipal clerks of the state. So it contains some things that are not necessarily directly relevant to the council, and we'll skip over some of those things as we go. Make sure I can make this thing work. There we go. Okay, so here are some introductory thoughts from the slide deck prepared. Grandma's hard. It's not always black and white. It can be very time consuming, and it often includes legal analysis. Go the right direction. Okay, so what is it? It governs how records are classified, retention, archiving, destruction, and provision to the public. And we're mostly going to be talking in this presentation just about how we handle classification and public requests. So did I skip one there? Okay. So in the law, there's a statement of legislative intent, and it points this out, that there are 2 constitutional rights: the public's right of access to information regarding the conduct of business, and the right of privacy in relation to personal data. So we're trying to balance those two things. But the statute does specifically say that where those two interests are equal, that access is favored over privacy. So as you know, the city recorder is the one responsible for responding to requests. Each department also has departmental records officers that are trained and will often respond to requests that are department specific, but individual employees should not and do not respond to grandma requests. And that is because of the protection to them. Well, there's a few reasons, and we've talked about this before in a previous meeting, but there are criminal penalties for violating grandma, so we don't want anybody risking that by taking it upon themselves to interpret it. Additionally, having a protocol for responding to the requests leaves us with records of those requests and how they were handled. So now it's not moving. Okay, so this is one of the preliminary questions, and again, something that we've discussed before, but what if somebody just asks you for something? Is that a grandma request? So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, are they asking you for information or are they asking you for a record? And in a slide in a few minutes, we'll talk about what a record is, but those aren't necessarily the same thing. And the second is, do you have it? And if not, who does? But if you do have it, then the question is, are you actually the owner of the information or the record? And if you're not as a follow-up to that, if you're not the owner, did you get it in a public meeting? If so, then even if you're not the owner, it's already public, right? So you can turn it over. But otherwise, best practice is to ask the person to file a grandma request if they're actually looking for a record, or to refer them to the actual owner of the information so that that person can be the one to make the decision about whether to share it or not. So is it a grandma request? Well, it has to be in writing, it has to contain identifying information about the requester, and it has to describe the records that they want with reasonable specificity. So the example here is, if you get a request that says, answer the following 10 questions, that's not a grandma request. That's a request for information. Now, and this, again, this is more for the clerks and for the recorders, but just so you're aware of the deadline, there is a deadline for responding. It's 10 business days or less. And if the requester is a reporter or presenting a story for publication, they have a presumption that they get 5 business days instead of 10. Okay, so what is a record? Well, it's pretty much anything physical or even electronic that somehow records some data. So books, letters, papers, maps, electronic data, anything that is prepared, owned, received, or retained by the entity and subdivision where all the information is reproducible by some means, okay? So that first one, that bullet point I, has been the subject of quite a bit of discussion lately. You know, I think there was one that you probably saw recently where there were some text messages, or there were alleged to be some text messages from a county official that were requested, personal messages on a personal device, on a personal plan, but in the official's official capacity acting as a county official. Well, the State Records Committee said if those text messages exist, they are a record, but they at the same time said, but because the cell phone is not government property, we have to take the official's word as to whether they exist or not. Okay, so it's a little bit of a murky area, and there's been some cases in recent years where different states have answered that question differently about whether how much control the government has to have over the information in order for it to be a record. Which goes back to the first slide about grandma being hard and asking the attorney when there's confusing questions. So here's some examples of things that are and are not records. Principally, you should know that personal notes are not records. I always find it interesting that they specify books in libraries are not records. I'm sure that at some point in the past, somebody must have asked for that in order for that to be included in the statute. Junk mail, et cetera. Those kinds of things are not records, and so the statute does not even apply to them. So here are some examples. Phone calls not recorded. not a record because there's nothing reproducible. A recording of the phone call is a record because it is reproducible. Handwritten notes, okay, those are personal notes, so not a record. Text message about a happy birthday, that is, even though it's made on the office phone, it's of a personal nature, so not an official nature, so it's not a record, so on and so forth. So as you can see, it gets complicated. So if you get a request, or in this case, if Elizabeth gets a request, she will send it on to you after having looked at some of these other things about whether we actually know what they're looking for and what the deadline is. And then what do you do as individual council members? Well, it's up to you to look for records that might be in your possession, such as searching emails, searching archives, et cetera. Now, we do have, the IS department has the ability within certain parameters to search emails on the city system, but they wouldn't have the ability to search your personal. So if you use a Gmail account specifically for your council business, then it'd be up to you to search that account for any records present there because the city doesn't have access. And I'm going to keep going and I'll answer questions at the end, but if you have a question in the meantime, please just stop me and ask your question. So once we have the records, and this is important, that the first step, remember, is to actually find the records and gather them together for the records officer, in this case, Elizabeth, or a departmental officer or the city recorder. The first step is to actually get the records in front of them. Then analysis of the records follows after that. So first step is to look and see, does grandma apply or do they fall under one of these exceptions? Okay. And the next step is there's actually a provision in grandma that says if there's a specific federal regulation that countermands grandma, then that rules. So I've never actually seen that happen in the last 15 years, but that's one of the steps of the analysis, is to look at that. But then the final step is to say, okay, if it's not exempt and grandma does apply, what is the classification of the record? And there are 4 different classifications. So, but taking a step back, here are some examples of things that are exempt. Medical records are exempt when HIPAA applies because that is a federal statute that supersedes grandma, and some other examples there. So this is an example of things that are public, and public is interesting because the rule is essentially, if it's not exempt, private, protected, or controlled, then it is public. So that is the definition of public. There's not a definition that says the following things are public. It's everything that isn't classified as something else is automatically public. So one of the classifications is private, and that can be things like social security numbers, driver's license numbers, criminal background, and some other things like that. Some contact information, some employee data that's about that kind of thing, about addresses and things like that. For example, performance evaluations are private. And then there is this catch-all that comes up occasionally where it says any information, the disclosure of which is a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy, can be classified as private, regardless of whether it's otherwise described in the statute or not. So that's come up a few times in cases, and is probably one of the provisions that most ends up before the State Records Committee when a government entity claims that one because it's subjective. So that can be one that gets appealed a lot. So protected records, there's over 75 plus categories of protected records. And that can be, I think this next slide contains some examples. So records for civil or criminal enforcement, government audit records, attorney-client privilege records, transcripts of closed meetings. Those are some of the ones that fall in that category. Controlled is a pretty narrow category, and you won't see very many of them, but this usually has to do with medical records that are not otherwise governed by grandma. Governed by HIPAA. So grandma still applies, but they are nevertheless controlled. So, but again, that very rarely comes up. So once the records have been classified, the next thing that the governmental entity has to do is decide whether well, let me put it this way. Classification can apply to parts of a document. So you could have it. So for instance, we just talked about the fact that social security numbers are private. That doesn't mean if you have a 60-page document that has one social security number in it, that the entire document is private. It means that either we take out the page that has the social security number on it, or that we redact and black out the social security number because the rest of the document is still public, just depending on the circumstances. So you should be aware that it is possible to share records with other government agencies, even if they are private, protected, or controlled, but that the other entity needs to be notified of and then honor our classification, and should refer, if somebody asks them for the records, they should refer them back to us instead of turning them over. So if you ask for records and get denied, there is an appeals process. Appeals first go to the mayor or the mayor's designee. There's a city records appeals board that then hears appeals from the mayor. You can then appeal to the state records committee and finally to district court. And then finally, this is always the last point of any presentation on grandma, the takeaway. Don't press send, don't write it down, don't commit it to your filing cabinet, etc., unless you're okay with it being on the cover of the Tribune or the Herald or whatever the local paper is. So just be aware of the fact that we now use electronic methods to communicate a large amount of information that years ago would never have been reproducible. It would have all taken place on over the telephone. So you need to be aware of the fact that you are, when you do that, you are creating a record, and those records are potentially subject to the statute and to disclosure. And I believe that's the last slide. Yes, any questions?
Councilor Ellsworth?
I should know this by now, but the role of the city recorder is to record effectively like the processes and transactions of the council in a public meeting, right? But is it also true that Elizabeth does part of the city recorder's role, because the city recorder comes to our evening meeting, the public hearing, but doesn't come to these meetings? Tell me about that process.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the fact of the matter is, if we go back to the open meetings training that we watched a few minutes ago in that video, that just like with the notice where it says, there's a part of that video where it says the city recorder normally provides the notice, but the governing body is actually responsible for the notice. The same thing applies to the minutes. It's not actually part of the city recorder's job description by statute that they do the minutes. It is the council's obligation that minutes must be kept. So our current system is basically just an agreement between the administration and the council, whereby the city recorder takes care of the evening meetings and council staff takes care of the work session, because it is ultimately the council's obligation that the minutes have to be kept and be maintained and meet all of the statutory requirements. And that process has been around since before I was even here, so I can't speak to why that was the resolution that was originally decided upon. Does that answer your question, or do you need more information than that?
No, that makes sense, but it's the council's responsibility to make sure that the minutes are taken.
Correct.
And so in a hypothetical world, we could assign you to take the minutes, or Elizabeth, or the city recorder, or someone else, or something like that.
For sure.
Okay. Thanks.
I'm wondering, Brian, if you could review a little bit about email exchanges between council members, because I always feel like maybe I get overly nervous about when it becomes inappropriate to have more thorough discussion on email and when we should.
Right.
Anyway, could you just walk us through
Yeah,
that?
that's a great question. It comes up because there's this thought, especially because the Open Meetings Act talks about electronic meetings, right? Sometimes this concern arises of, well, what is a meeting, and does the Open Meetings Act prohibit all deliberation outside of a meeting? Are you not supposed to be talking about things outside of a meeting? And that's not actually the case. The only thing that the Open Meetings Act requires is that if there is a quorum gathered in a location in a meeting called by someone in authority to call that meaning the council chair, for the purpose of discussing the business, then that meeting has to be open and the public has to have notice of it. That doesn't prevent conversations even between majority of the council outside of those meetings, but the decisions and the actions can only be taken in the meetings. And in fact, there's a provision specifically of the Open Meetings Act that says that it specifically is not intended to prohibit electronic communications between councilors, between the members of a public body outside of the meeting. So it's actually perfectly fine to send emails and to have email discussions about topics of consideration. I've suggested in the past that I get a little bit nervous. I've never seen this happen, but I'd get a little bit nervous if, well, I think a Zoom meeting, I think would obviously be out of bounds. Emails are obviously okay. The in-between kind of gray areas, if everybody was on Facebook Messenger at the same time, live messaging about a topic, that would make me nervous, right? I think it's kind of a gray area. I don't know that it's clear that that's a violation as long as no action is actually taken during that conversation. But I have in the past usually recommended against that kind of thing, against any kind of instant messaging. But email itself is fine, recognizing that all of those emails are going to be subject to grandma. And so between the two statutes actually work in concert, that your decisions have to be made in the meeting. And if there was a member of the public that felt like the entire discussion about why you decided something was hidden in email to be out of the public light, then they could just go out, file a grandma request for all of those emails, and the discussion would be revealed. But there's nothing prohibiting deliberation, consideration, discussion outside of the meeting.
Very helpful. Thank you. Any other question? For Whipple?
So if we're having one of those email threads where we're talking, are we okay so long as we don't end up doing a vote count?
Right. Yeah. As long as you're having an email discussion, you're saying, well, I am really concerned about X that citizens have raised, and somebody else says, yeah, here's the reasons why I'm not concerned about that. That's all fine as long as somebody doesn't say at the end of it, well, it looks like we're 4-3, so let's get this on the agenda. Right? It exists for the purpose of you being able to discuss your ideas and thoughts. And frankly, I've never worried about it with particularly this council, but even past councils in Provo, because the practice has always been for the council to be very open about their deliberative process, and usually to come into these meetings and talk extensively about all of the reasons why. I didn't
That was
say
a very charitable way to put it, Brian.
about all of the reasons for why they've been convinced of something and deciding something. So that's always been part of the record and never been a concern.
Well, I guess maybe if I could follow up on that, I mean, email seems like in some ways a way to make our meetings more efficient in that regard. But I don't know if there's a fine line between saying, well, I'm not calling for a vote, but if I said, hey, if anybody has any major reservations about this, I would appreciate hearing your reservations now during the week before our meeting next week, because then I could go back and
find information or
find more
answer
information
questions
or draft something different or what other. So in some ways, it's sort of a soft. Do I have the thumbs up kind of thing that to move forward with something, and that is that appropriate?
Well, yeah, and again, at the end of the day, the question. Well, I guess there's two questions, right? And I'd be remiss if I didn't point this out, because I've said this before about some of the other grandma related questions in previous meetings. You need to remember that there's a legal consideration and a political consideration to all of these questions, right? So the legal consideration is, yes, that's totally fine. If at the end of the day, the vote is being taken in this meeting, and there's at least enough of a record in this meeting to show that you had a reason for voting how you voted, then that's fine, and it doesn't matter how much discussion there has been beforehand. The political consideration is you probably ought to be asking yourselves, if this email that I am sending asking how much support there is for this item were to be on the front page of the Daily Herald, would people be outraged because it looks like we're doing backroom deals? Right? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you probably shouldn't send that email because that would be subject to. So it's in that sense, in the political realm, it's a little bit of a gray area, but it's a question of, are we conducting the business transparently and in public? And to the degree that you're soliciting information and questions beforehand and then addressing that information and questions in the public meeting, I don't think that there's any hit to the transparency aspect. It's only if you're purposely doing it in that form in order to avoid discussing it in the public meeting that I think you get yourselves in trouble.
I have another question. I don't know if others. Yeah. That is spoken like a lawyer.
It depends.
So this is, this question has come up recently in our thought process about what's the minimal amount of obligation that we have to explain our votes, I guess. How much, I mean, I know there's a personal preference issue there, but what's
Right.
the legal standard, if any, about how much a counselor has to say about why they're voting one way or the other?
So it's not, the real question is not actually how much a counselor has to say, it's how much information there is on the record. And so what I mean by that is the legal standard is if a decision of the council were to be challenged, the challenge would argue that the decision was arbitrary, capricious, and illegal. The illegal part of that means that they would be arguing it actually violates some other law or some constitutional principle, which is irrelevant to the question you're asking. The relevant part is this arbitrary and capricious part, right? And so the legal standard for that is they would have to be arguing in court that essentially, based on the record of the meeting, there was no articulable reason that could have led you to vote how you voted. So to more directly answer your question, if staff gives up and gives a 45-minute presentation or a 15-minute presentation that says, here are the pros and cons about why you might vote for this proposal, and particularly they list some reasons why you might vote for that proposal, and then no counselor utters a word, but everyone just votes yes, that's actually still a sufficient record, because in a court proceeding, the argument would be they voted for it because of what was established on the record by staff. So really the only time you get yourself into trouble is if staff gets up and says, so the proposal is to vote on the following ordinance, and then sits down, and then the entire council votes without making a comment. That could be potentially problematic. Even then, assuming that we have materials even that I would probably be okay in many instances because we're going to have staff reports. It's such a high legal standard that you essentially have to argue that nobody can even come up with a reason why you might have voted that way other than a bad reason, other than because you were prejudiced against someone or wanting to help out your business partner or something like that.
So obviously we want to avoid the circumstance of having 7 speeches on every point, right? So if it's been discussed in a work meeting, is that sufficient?
Yes.
Okay, just want to be sure.
So
This is an unusually specific question, but I was watching another city. This was, I don't know, a year or two ago, and they were appointing an official to fill a council member's seat who had vacated the seat, and it was like a midterm appointment, right? And like no one spoke about individuals. They just like only went through this voting process. If Provo had to do something like that, people really aren't, I'm kind of thinking out loud, I apologize, but people don't really want to talk about someone's character and competency on a dais, but you can't do that in a closed meeting either. So do you think the people in that city either talked about it like one-on-one offline on the phone, or they all just made their lists and nobody talked about it?
Well, that's a good question. Do you remember how long ago this was?
It was probably 2-ish years ago.
Okay. And the reason why I asked that question is because the provision of grandma that says you can't discuss character and competence in a closed meeting in that specific instance is actually a recent change. It's actually a recent change because a city did that and the legislature didn't like it. So it's kind of been actually a two-step process. Several years ago, it actually wasn't against the Open Meetings Act to actually have the application interview for the midterm vacancy be in a closed meeting. And a city did that and filled the position, and the state legislature got complaints and outlawed it. And so then the applications happened in an open meeting, but the character and competence discussion happened in a closed meeting somewhere, and somebody complained about that and they outlawed that too. So, my suspicion is that maybe what you viewed might have actually been before that was not allowed and they actually did have a closed meeting about it. But if not, I don't know. I mean, if we were going to go through that process right now and you were to ask me my advice would probably just be have the application process in the open meeting and reach your decisions and make your votes based on the application process that you had in the open meeting to the best of your ability. If that makes sense. But also from a technical standpoint, it wouldn't be illegal to have phone conversations again, it goes back to our previous issue. It's the meeting context that the public feels like the decision is being made in a meeting that they don't have access to.
Okay, any other questions? Is that all you have?
That is, I guess, just for the benefit of Chair Handley and Vice Chair McCain know this, but when the training session was originally scheduled, I was going to do a presentation on development agreements as well, but we've actually pulled that off the schedule in order to do that at a joint meeting of the council and the planning commission in the relatively near future. But the result of that meaning that we're probably a little bit ahead of schedule because that was included in the time. So.
Okay, thank you. I see Don Jarvis arriving as we speak, so we will be able to go on to our next item. Okay. Wait just a moment to come into the room, but we'll be turning to item number 3, which is a resolution of the Provo City Municipal Council outlining their support for adoption of the 2022 recommendations of Utah's Uniform Building Code Commission regarding building energy efficiency. Thank you, Don, for making it just in time. And I believe we also joined by Kevin Emerson on Zoom, or no?
Kevin had something come up, so he's not available
Okay,
to be here during the work meeting.
All right, go ahead, Malia. This will be presented by Malia Daly, policy analyst.
Okay, great. Thanks, George. So I'm just going to be introducing this, and then I'm going to let Don kind of take over as him and Kevin are really more of the experts on this. This is a resolution. So as you know, the legislature met today. The session started. And during the beginning of the session, they have a lot of interim committee bills come. One of these interim committee bills came through the Interim Business and Labor Committee. And this is regarding recommendations for Utah's Uniform Building Code. And there's actually a state appointed commission that goes through and looks at all of these building codes every 6 years and does massive upgrades throughout the whole document, throughout the whole book. Within that code update, there is a section about increasing energy efficiency standards within the state. And so this is a resolution. Oh, I should give a little bit more background. These codes recommendations passed the building commission 11-1, them voting. These code recommendations, though, the energy efficiencies are 3 pages, I believe. We had that in the supporting documents, but they voted on the entire code recommendations, which is about 290 pages. So this is just a small portion of those recommendations. And then it went to the Business and Labor Interim Committee, and there it passed unanimously. And that's a committee made up of senators and representatives. So now, if it hasn't already been read into the calendar of the legislature, it will be shortly, either this week or next week, and then be voted on. And usually interim bills that get passed unanimously get passed through very quickly, pretty non-controversial consensus bills. But this resolution specifically is just showing support from Provo City about these energy efficiency specific codes within that larger code update. So I'm going to let Don take it from there. He has a slide presentation prepared for you that kind of walks through what exactly these code recommendations are within the greater code update. Kevin specifically worked on this with the commission, and he might be able to be here tonight and speak more to it, but I'm going to turn this over to Don.
And as Mr. Jarvis is coming up, I just want to clarify that Don had brought this to my attention. Kevin Emerson, who spoke with us a meeting or two ago about stretch code, is sort of the go-to guy at Utah Clean Energy on these kinds of questions. And so they had brought it to my attention. I thought it was a good idea for us to show support for this. So just so you know that I'm the culprit here for getting this on the agenda. Go
I'm
ahead.
always glad to blame you. Ignore the date on this. I forgot to change. I was going to put 17 January 2023, but the date's wrong, but ignore that. Everything else is okay. I'd like to congratulate Ms. McKay and Ms. Whipple for being elected to be the new leaders.
That hasn't happened yet.
Well, hasn't yet. Well, okay. Well,
You just let
I'm
it
a
out.
prophet then, I guess. So anyway, but if it ever happens, I'm in favor, and I appreciate what all of you do, investing your time and energy for very modest compensation, week after week, month after month. It's a lot of work, and I understand that. So we want to plan for the good future for our children. In 2050, this toddler, who happens to be my great-grandson, will be 30 years old. And George and I have looked at some of the babies being born in our family, and it gives us additional emphasis to our work. And I'm sure all of you have somebody like this among your friends, neighbors, or family that gives additional emphasis to what decisions you make here at the council to make sure you do the most good for the most people for the longest time. But it's true that energy codes have enormous effect. I mean, building codes have enormous effect on energy use. This energy use here, notice how it starts in 1975, and as residential codes get improved, look how the line drops on energy use. Now, that's enormous difference, enormous saving for people trying to make their budgets fit in and pay their bills. Now, that only goes up to 2015, but it's only dropping since then. Now, this Uniform Building Code Commission, originally, it used to have the power to set the building codes, but in 2009, at the instigation of the legislature, it became just an advisory body. And so the legislature now gets to set what the codes actually are. And that's the reason why we're encouraging the legislature to do the right thing, to be as mindful of energy efficiency as makes good sense. So that was in 2009. That was a change. And you might want to know how does Utah's energy code, how do they compare to what is around us? Well, we're not as good as Texas and Nevada, but we're better than Wyoming and Colorado. We're kind of in the middle there. It's certainly not extreme by any means, and we could do better. And the better we do, the better it is for our people who have to pay their electricity and gas bills every month. And as you know, some of this is just repetition of what's in the resolution, which you've already read, I'm sure. There are three different cost-benefit studies have found that updating Utah's energy code is in Utah's best interest. UBCC recommendations will improve long-term home affordability, and it will only cost about 0.5% of the extra cost or of the house's cost. And UBCC recommendations include numerous amendments requested by the home builders. I mean, it isn't just taking exactly what the International energy conservation code recommended, but it's sensitive to what our local people have advised. Two local groups have strongly recommended the updated code, Utah Foundation in 2022, Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute in 2020. And the estimate is that even with the changes that have been made to sort of make the changes less aggressive, home buyers will still save over $150 annually. That's after the cost increase. So there should be positive cash flow, which feels kind of like return on investment within 3 years. So I think it would be a good thing. It's true that the home builders are worried that homeowners are not going to want anything that would raise the cost of houses. But this is a very small raise, and many homes actually now have what is equivalent to a miles per gallon rating on them. It's called the HERS rating. You know that there are a lot of homes built by Ivory Homes in the state of Utah and by Garbett Homes, and they all have an energy rating. So as these new homes come online and are rated better, I think people will feel good about it. So I believe it's time for Utah to update. It's badly outdated. The building code, you notice it's not, even though it was ostensibly a 2015 code, there are so many things in it that are outdated even then. So it's kind of like a combination of 2009, 2012. Oops, I have an extra zero in there. Sorry about that. And 2015. So it's time. It's really time to update this building code. And I hope the legislature will do the right thing. And with a little help from you, they'll probably be more interested in energy efficiency. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can. If I can't, I've got Kevin Emerson on my cell phone, and I'll call him.
Okay. Any questions? Councilor Fillmore.
Mr. Jarvis, thank you for your continued interest in these matters. Question for you. This building code obviously applies only to new residential construction. Does
Yes, it's new residential.
does also apply to remodeled homes at a certain threshold?
You're asking me whether it applies to remodeled homes?
Yeah, for example, if you've got an older home and you're partially gutting it to put in a new basement or something, does it apply to that kind of construction, or is it simply new homes from scratch?
I believe it's new homes. I can check with Kevin about that, but I believe it's just for new homes.
That's what I understood as well. But
Is that all, Mr. Fillmore? Okay.
Councilor McKay.
Thank you, Don. I did have a question. My understanding is that the code bill has been stalled because the Uniform Code Commission failed to produce and apply a cost benefit analysis during the review process that's required by law. Is that true?
It's actually not true.
Okay.
I believe that Senator Bramble got that rumor and he was repeating it, but it's simply not true. There are three different cost benefit analyses that have been done. And the National Home Builders Association had a cost benefit analysis, which was very negative. But then there's an analysis of that says it's not very reliable analysis. So there have been cost benefit analyses of it.
I got that information from the Home Builders Association, and they said it was stalled.
It's simply not true.
I know that they gave 50 to 80 amendments that they had questions. I don't know what the correct number is, but I couldn't find anywhere saying how many of the amendments they did incorporate into the proposed.
I couldn't tell you that
Building
exact
code.
number, but
Okay.
they did have their say, and they had a number were accepted, and Kevin and Utah Clean Energy feels good about the compromise, that it's not everything that the Utah Clean Energy wanted, not everything that the home builders wanted, but it's the sort of thing that happens all the time in the council.
Okay.
You make good.
compromises,
The cost analysis I reviewed came from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory.
correct?
They seem to do all of them, at least two of them.
Yeah. There was one by a Utah group too.
Sent me that one. I did read that one. I saw the, okay, so I
It's
saw.
actually on the fact sheet. It's called Nexant, Nexant.
I think that's one. Okay. There's a lot of stuff I kept reading on this. It's a lot, like that whole, like you said, that it was so boring and long. I guess my balance is just worrying that affordability of homes is such an issue, huge issue.
Yes.
And just making sure that this is balanced. And I'm hearing like two different things. So that's really hard. And that's confusing me.
I understand. I've heard from Marcia Judkin. She's also very worried about affordability. Good news in a way is that houses are getting a little more affordable. The market is cooling off a bit. And in addition to that, this is only going to add less than 1/2% of the total cost of the house. And when that's amortized over the 30-year loan, it's a very small amount extra. And within 3 years, they're going to feel like it's going to be better with the new building code.
That's just the problem, is that I'm hearing like different thoughts on that. Like the builders are telling me, for example, just one, the heat pumps. I've priced out heat pumps. They're very expensive because they're awesome.
Right.
So they're like tens of thousands.
I don't believe that the heat pumps are required in this. They're just
but if you do them, they've increased, like they want increased HVAC efficiency equipment is required now for heat pumps with this.
Yes.
And that's a cost of an extra $8,196. Like there are different things that seem like a lot. Different ones have simple pay. Like I've been told that there's some that have simple payback of 226 years or 97 years, or I don't know. I just feel like I don't have enough information. Well,
I can tell you about heat pumps because I just installed one.
No, you're like the master of heat pumps.
And Rick Cox on our committee, who's a local businessman, was very negative about heat pumps a few years ago. He decided to look into it. He had bids for a rental he had it installed, and there are lots and lots of rebates available. Provo Power offers $1,000 rebate. There's federal and there's state rebates. And he found that it was only $300 difference between the two, between an old regular heating system and the heat pump. So I really think that's the direction things are going. The heat pumps are going to be, you're all going to have heat pumps eventually.
Yes, they are the superior product for sure.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up on that?
Go ahead.
So Don, this 1/2%.
Yes.
Where does that come from, that statistic?
This is an estimate that Utah Clean Energy is making on it.
So that's the clean energy group that, what do the home builders say about that? Do they agree with that 1/2%, or do the home builders agree on it? The home builders are often have their own facts and figures. Right. So what do they say it will be?
Well, Catrice gave a number.
Well, that was $1,000, some $1,000 amount, but so that's debatable. The 1/2% we're getting from a strong advocate group, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
but they have the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory on their side. They have Nexant on their side. They have two analyses by Pacific Northwest.
And the Gardner Institute, did they come out in favor?
Pardon?
The Kim Gardner
Yes,
Institute.
they did.
Kim Gardner, is in favor.
Wholeheartedly supported.
Absolutely.
Now, the Home Builders Association, you talked about a process of compromise going back and forth. So at the end of the day, with those compromises, the Home Builders Association sign off on this and recommend it?
Well, they did sign off. Well, at least I guess I can't say for sure whether they are how they're going to advocate in the legislature on this. They probably will. There'll be hearings, and they'll be heard in the hearings, and they'll probably advocate for more conservative changes than what the Utah
Uniform Building Code Commission proposed. So my guess is they'll probably want things to be more conservative. They always do. But I would like to say this about that. The legislature in 2015 and before that has tended to totally agree with the International Energy Construction Code, and for commercial buildings, it's gone in exactly as the international people recommended. Why is that? It's because the commercial people, they don't just look at the initial cost, they look at the maintenance costs. They're very aware of maintenance costs. And so they said yes. And so the 2015 commercial building code is right up to international standards. And I sympathize with the Home Builders Association because they have to sell to home buyers. And if they tell a home buyer, well, you can either have better insulation or a marble countertop. What do most of the home buyers want? They want the marble countertop, especially if they don't have a HERS rating on the house. So they realize how much it's going to save them. So I sympathize with the home builders, but in the long run, it really would be better to build the house better and reduce the cost of the monthly utility costs you have to pay.
You know, one of the things, if I can interject here, that's really crucial about building codes is that unlike I can trade out a piece of one of my appliances in my home, I can go buy a more fuel efficient car. I can make really quick changes in the pollution I'm contributing to the air in almost every other way. But when it comes to my house, and to building structures in general, that process is much, much more difficult, which is why the sort of upfront standards are so important and so valuable to get right, so that we don't end up having to wait 30 years before a structure is completely rebuilt or retrofitted, at very high expense, because it's only going to be more expensive later to make those changes. So I think that's something that I hope we can keep in mind.
And we're very fortunate that the mayor went to bat for us and required that this building had excellent insulation. It has an excellent envelope, and that's why our utility costs every month are something like 18% less than it would have been if it had been a normal kind of building. So I think we're setting a good example, and I think we ought to encourage the legislature to do that for everybody. So for the long term.
So the international group that you mentioned was focused just on commercial buildings, right?
No, it has both. But when the Building Code Commission recommends the commercial code and the residential code, the legislature has accepted the commercial code right as the international people suggested. But for residential buildings, they've tinkered with it some, partly for the reasons I've mentioned. It's hard to get everybody to agree that the insulation is more important than marble countertops. I sympathize with them.
Okay.
Councilor McKay?
I think George makes an excellent point. I know that they didn't do the insulation right in my house, and it bugs me all the time.
Mine too.
Yeah, it drives me bananas. I keep thinking about just putting holes in walls and blowing something into it. But yeah, the Utah Clean Energy Review and the Northwest Pacific National Laboratory Review are no-brainers. Like, how could you not do it? It was just wanting a balance of reviews. And that's just, hearing one thing is hard when, trying to figure out where it lies. But yeah, no brainer with the Utah Clean Energy and the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory Reviews. Thank you.
Agreed.
Will Kevin be available tonight?
He can be, yes.
Yeah.
And
Might be good to have him available maybe to address some of these questions. Other questions? So we'll have this come back to us this evening, correct, Malia? And if you have any further questions between now and then, and maybe if you get a chance to talk to Kevin and he's not available, you might be able to get any additional details from him that might be useful.
I'll text him or email him a couple of these questions that came up today
Okay.
that I was a little foggy on. Tonight, this item will come up when, roughly?
This is item number number 6. So
Not too early.
kind of hard to say because we've got a bunch of sort of public recognition kind of things happening prior to that. Could be we can text you, but I
Okay.
think it might be
And I'll-
6:15 maybe.
I'll tell Kevin.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a break for 10 minutes. It is 2:45. We'll come back at 3 o'clock. Full 15 minutes.
Recording stopped.
Just chit chatting. Elizabeth, I'm ready.
Recording in progress.
All right, we'll begin again after our break. I want to welcome Mayor Kafusi, and I did not mention that Councillor Whipple had joined us. So we are still without Councillor Hoban, who's excused. But we're grateful to have everyone here. We'll start with item number 4, which is an ordinance adopting the Provo City General Plan and appendices. And Brandon Larson and Hannah Salzl will be our presenters.
Thank you, Council. That pulled up here, our slide presentation pulled up here for you. All right, thank you. You've advanced it back and I'm gonna take it a little ways forward here. So last time we spoke with you, there were several motions made, things that you had asked as a council to be added or addressed in the general plan. And so we went back and addressed several things. These are the major things that we addressed. One thing I didn't mention is we did go through the general plan and made sure that the city was all uniform in how it was capitalized. So thank you. Well, both Ellsworth, Councilors Ellsworth and Whipple on that one. So, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things. You can see the list there before you, but there's a few specific things that I think are particularly important. One of the things that came up as being very important was addressing the unhoused, those who experience homelessness. What we did as a staff was we added this language into chapter 4 in the housing chapter, and then we added some additional language into chapter 7. It was kind of an interesting experience because as I started, looking at the available resources we have in the area for those that are homeless, it was interesting that it kind of took me to a lot of different organizations, and I was thinking, boy, if I was homeless, it would sure be nice to be able to go to one place and get a list of resources. Went and checked Salt Lake City, and they had a pretty comprehensive list of. You could go to their website, and it was pretty easy to find resources. And maybe even a better example was Fort Worth, Texas. You could go on their website, and it was very easy to navigate. They have a program called Directions Home. And on that website, you can easily access a 3 or 4 page list of resources that are available for the homeless. And they have a coordinator over that program. And so it was very easy. And I thought it would sure be nice for those who are experiencing these challenges, or those who are at risk of experiencing these challenges, to be able to access this information a little easier. So that's one of our recommendations. I'll go advance a slide one more here. We had talked about maybe having some of this language in chapter 7, public services. Felt that it probably was helpful in probably both 4 and 7. And so we added that language and then came up with some goals, and those goals pretty much summarize, I think, the language that we've got on the screen there. One thing that I think would be helpful is if we had a member of the city staff who was, and I think we have a number of people who help with this issue, but it would really be helpful to have a single person who kind of was at the taking the lead on these issues. I think it'd really help give like that Directions Home program in Fort Worth, Texas. There's a coordinator, like I said, for that, and it'd be really helpful to have someone at the city coordinating these efforts. Also, one of the things that as I've in some of the other projects I've done, it's been interesting to see kind of some of the issues for, like, example, older adults. There's subsidized housing and there's higher end housing, but I think a number of you are aware of the Cove Point development. Cove Point is one of the few developments in the city that's not subsidized, but it's relatively it's on the lower end of cost. There's just not a lot of that. When I worked on that project a year or two ago, it was interesting to get some feedback from some of the seniors. So one thing that we would also encourage here is the development of additional housing for older adults and disabled individuals, and then continuing to work with the people, with the organizations that are listed in 4C there. So that was a major addition to the general plan that we propose. A couple of other things that was brought up in the last general plan meeting that we had with council was we talked about safe school routes and trail safety. This was language that we added to address those issues, talk a little bit about how each school has a safe route, and one of our recommendations is we should be reviewing those during our development reviews. And then also a goal here to make lighting and pedestrian crossings a key consideration when we're designing, constructing, and maintaining our city facilities. So next, one of the other points I wanted to highlight here was one of the things that I was asked to do, that staff was asked to do, was to make sure we had a liquefaction map. Liquefaction, again, is kind of when you have an earthquake and the ground's somewhat saturated, the earth can kind of lose its stability. It kind of becomes like jello, and you can have a lot of shaking, and buildings can fall to the earth. And so this is a map that shows, this would be a map that would be included in the general plan that shows the relative risk factors for the areas of the city. Interesting note there that I put on the map is the liquefaction data that appears to be available seems to all go back, as near as I could tell, go back to 1994 study that some from Utah State University did. So that is we found a couple of different sources, and they both pointed back to that study in 1994. So this is just a quick note. We found a few maps that were a little hard to read or weren't super sharp. The image sharpness wasn't great, and so we tried to clean that up. I think the copy that we put online I think this one still had a bit of trouble, which I was surprised. We'll make sure these are all sharpened, but this was there was a vicinity map included in the general plan, and we'll make sure that these maps are all sharp and look good. So yeah.
Does the city limit map have our little boundary change with Springfield?
That's a good question. I can check with GIS. I didn't think about that, truthfully. I know that occurred. We sometimes end up depending a lot on our GIS guys like Stan, and so I'll have to check with him and find out. But regardless, we'll make sure that's reflected in our map. And then going on, one other thing I wanted to highlight was we had a motion to include some discussion about clean and renewable energy. And so you can see there, we added some discussion about the city being a leader in renewable energy, and that we should support renewable energy sources, like you can see on the screen there. So these are major things that we added to the general plan since we last spoke. You can see the other items. There was a trails and peaks map that still was didn't reference Kive Peak, and we fixed that, and the sharpness wasn't great, so we fixed that. Reference a sustainability coordinator. We're talking about parking and for bikes and scooters. So these are the additions, and lastly, we at the end of our meeting on the 13th of December, I didn't get a chance to go over the appendices A, C, and D, and so I'll give you a little bit of information on those three. Appendix A explains the public engagement that occurred for this general plan. The engagement's been extensive. There's a list of engagement exercises that occurred. There is just a whole bunch of data that we could throw at the public, but we chose to only put the Y2 survey in there. The Y2 survey results are in the public engagement, and then if they want to see the data from the other two surveys that were done, they're welcome to come to staff and we can show them that data. We just didn't want to add another 50 or so pages to the general plan. So that's what's in there. It's just basically just a quick highlight of the engagement activities, and then the Y2 survey. The Appendix B we went over last time. Again, that is our housing, our moderate income housing element, and that was adopted back at the end of September. We were told we had a review by the state, and they found a few deficiencies in it, along with 3/4 of the rest of the cities in the state. And we have addressed those issues. We sat down with a person who's responsible for reviewing these applications at the Department of Workforce Services. They said we were in good shape after we made the changes. We went back to them and again, and have asked them to do another check. And so that check we should find out later this week, have an additional confirmation on that. But as far as what we've been told by the state, we've addressed those issues that were found to be in non-compliance. So the annexation maps and policy, annexation policies and maps were, this is kind of a carryover from the last general plan. The last general plan, this was laid out in the last general plan. It establishes how, just policies for how we're going to deal with annexations, how we're going to deal with boundary adjustments like the one we just did with Springville, and doesn't necessarily lay out how we deal with disconnections, as I recall, but it at least proposes a large one, the ski resort area to the east. So this document lays out those guidelines, gives us maps. You can see on the screen here the map. This is the annexation policy map, and it gives us shows 7 areas. Yes, 7 areas that are still outside the city's boundaries that we propose to bring in at some point, or at least we've adopted policies and procedures and considerations for when if and when these pieces of land come into the city. Yeah.
Just number 4 isn't that the national property now?
Yeah, exactly.
So shouldn't that kind of adjust we're not anticipating that we annex?
Yeah, that's, I mean, yes, that's true. I mean, 6 is kind of in the same boat. I mean, most of 6 is, you know, public land as well. It could come off. I mean, yeah, I guess that's an interesting question. We could take it off. It is noted that it's definitely land that is public. And so I don't know that the city would ever want to bring that in or not, but we reference it as sensitive land. And if it ever comes in, that should come in as open space and parks and open space. So
Brandon, I have a question or maybe a suggestion with regard to that also in my mind it relates to South Fork Canyon, which is not on this map.
Yeah.
The foothills and canyons plan and the river and lake plan may end up altering this annexation map, right?
Mhm.
In some ways. And so we would presumably after exhaustively looking at all of these questions, we would go back and amend this.
This
Right.
document
So-
can certainly be amended.
So I guess my suggestion is we could do that at that point. We don't have to like sort of decide now whether or not we want to adjust any of these policies. Certainly not on the fly, but I just want to make sure that the staff sees it that way as well, that if we develop those plans out in good rigorous detail, my assumption all along was the most important outcome of those two plans would be a map that says this is Provo City's intentions for these areas of adjacent areas and within the city.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, because I can't think of a more thorough exercise we'd go through, particularly with these, you know, like 4, 6, and if we do get into South Fork, it's going to be that canyon and foothills and the lakes and rivers plan that's going to really shape the policies for these areas. So these are high level policies that we're talking about here that can be changed at any time, and certainly that foothills and canyons and lakeshore plan can certainly shape this document. So this document again is a carryover in many ways from the last general plan. We did update it. We updated the descriptions for that's probably the biggest thing we did with this section, is we updated the descriptions for annexations areas 1 through 7, and just kind of things change over 20 years. And so we updated those to kind of there may have been some areas that were removed. I know that part of the exercise we went through with this map is we did remove all the areas that actually had been annexed. I know over in area 5, that area had certainly changed. Let's see, right there, area 5 had changed a bit because of annexations, and I think 2 also had changed a bit. So we cleaned this up and made the map more updated, and then updated the descriptions. So finally, the last thing, the last appendix is the general plan map, Appendix D. So we took, I think I've talked to you a bit about this map. We had a future land use map proposed that was proposed in the general plan about a year ago. And after going through that, as we were working with Y2 to come up with a survey, we started looking at the general plan itself and looked at the future land use map and found some inconsistencies in it and found the map a bit lacking. So we went back to the general plan we had and really went through it very thoroughly and updated it. We borrowed some of the ideas from the future land use map, like the gateways. We thought that was helpful. Gave some soft edges to the commercial and industrial land use designations to make it so that when the Planning Commission, and more particularly the City Council, has a general plan map amendment or a zoning map amendment that this could help you in your decision making, particularly with those soft edges. You could infer from that these aren't pinned to parcels, and so there may be a little wiggle room when we're looking at zone map amendments and general plan amendments. So the other thing we did on this map is trying to see. Oh yes, there they are. We added many areas of our city, not all, but a number of them have, a number of the areas or neighborhoods have specific neighborhood plans, and so those areas are notated on this map as well. So someone can see where those areas are. There's on the legend, it shows you those neighborhood map areas, neighborhood plan areas. So that's kind of my update for you since we last came before you. We've been through a very thorough process. We've just an amazingly thorough process, unlike anything I've ever been through. The city residents have been engaged. They've been involved in the process. The planning commission, we've had focus and work groups, and we feel like there's the voice of probably 1,000 or more people in this document. And so we feel like it's been through an amazingly thorough process. And at this point, I'd recommend that you approve tonight this document. So we've went through and updated those things you asked us to at the last meeting, and that's where staff feels we're at, is at the point of adoption. So
Thank you very much for that presentation, for all your work.
thank you.
All right, questions, Councilor McKay?
Hey, Aaron, thank you. One question, and a constituent brought to me, I think it's on page 15, it does the ethnicity of the city, and there's no African American, and they looked it up on the census, the US Census, and it says we have 1%. And they're wondering why that was not included.
We didn't include most. I know we referenced Latino because it was a
Significant percentage.
We
Yeah.
wanted to highlight, I think part of the point there was to highlight a little bit of the multicultural dynamic here in the city.
But
without
not
going-
exactly every ethnicity
but
down
not
to
every
the. Okay.
ethnicity. We're certainly grateful for all of the cultures. I mean, that's one of the amazing things about Provo, is the amazing people here and from different ethnicities. So we appreciate them. But yeah, we didn't go through. If the council would like us to highlight all that, we certainly can. So
Do you have an opinion about that? Okay.
I don't think it hurts to add it. But then does it get into I'm sure there's dozens of ethnicities.
that was our concern, is that there's a good number of people that are of Asian descent, African American, Polynesian are
you're
well
right.
represented in the city. And so we thought it might be laborious to list all of those, and then we ultimately might leave somebody out. And we certainly didn't mean to exclude anybody by any
Maybe
means.
just, what does it say on?
You could put in a chart, like copy and paste a chart from the census, and that would be really straightforward.
Easy?
My feeling would be, yeah, something to address it briefly but accurately would probably be better than excluding it. Sure. If nothing else, I mean, I do think it, like, first of all, we don't want to create the impression that there aren't certain people in our city. So even if it's a small number, I like the idea of sort of the plan acknowledging the demographic of the city as it is in 2022. And then of course, years later it could change, and that could be an important point of comparison or something. So it seems like better to err on the side of being more detailed.
And maybe there's even a group of like 3% and we just put them all under the 3, I don't.
Yeah, that there might be brief ways to do it that just acknowledge.
We might already have something we can.
Is that general consensus on the council on that?
I think we want to be as inclusive as possible.
That's not too difficult. Okay.
No, I think we can, if it's okay, I think that's something we can address before the night meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Other questions that have come up?
I have some comments.
Go ahead.
So I put these in an email to the council and an email to Brandon. I wanted to make sure someone wants to pull up the document. On page 2 of the one I was reading most recently, there's a name that's misspelled. And I sent that in the comments in December and then this week to make sure we caught that.
Yeah, we addressed that this morning.
And then I was wondering, is there a definition for single family or one family?
There is in the city code. We thought that was a better place for that definition, for definitions.
Is the definition inclusive of townhomes?
The definition is dwelling, and then in 1402, chapter 1402 of the code, it starts out with dwelling, and then it starts breaking it down. Single family, there's a definition for one family detached, which is a traditional home, and then one family attached is a townhome. I think it specifically uses the word townhome in the definition.
Okay, just because in this document it says one family, and there's been conversations about that in the past where it was interpreted as multifamily, and then when it came to the council, the assumption was that one family was detached. So I think any clarity that can be added is really helpful.
We thought that the clarity was sufficient in the city code currently, so that's why we didn't address that in the general plan.
So in the general plan, when it says one family, which is it referring to, attached or detached?
Honestly, I've appreciated the flexibility of not having that specific. If the council would like it that specific, I suppose we certainly can do that. In our minds, one family is attached or detached. That's how the city code treats it. So it's either a single family, a traditional detached home, or a townhome. So
yeah, I just want to manage expectations, because if it says something like it says encourage the development of additional one-family home developments in key areas, such as the city's west side, to address housing shortages and to facilitate additional economic growth and opportunities. So that's an instance in the general plan where it wasn't clear what was intended. People likely have different expectations, or
yeah, we can, if you'd like, if the council would like us to define that, or if you want us to address that, we can certainly do that. I don't think that'd take very long for us to address that in the plan before we come back tonight.
I'm not sure I understand what the proposal is. I mean, can we, I want to just make sure we get motions with specific language we can all see.
if the intent of the staff and of the council, the way the council read it, was that one family means both attached and detached, then let's include a clarifying statement somewhere that says one family means attached and detached.
But you're saying it's already in the code, Brandon?
It is in the code. Counselor, I feel like you're suggesting that some of our policies, I think I see what you're saying. Some of our policies refer to a desire to have more one family. I think it may even say more one family homes on the west side. And I think it doesn't, it may or may, it may not. I think it actually does. I think there's one goal that talks about detached one family homes, but I can see that, yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that, how we addressed it.
So the issue that I'm trying to describe is that for a long time, we've heard that the west side does not want attached housing, don't want townhomes. And this leaves that open and says single family or one family is inclusive of, in our code, both attached and detached. So how are we interpreting that going forward? Because if a developer comes in and says your general plan says you allow one family and your code describes one family as attached, then that's the expectation we're creating. That's what we should be going forward with.
Well, I'm still not sure what you're proposing, because it seems to me that if it's a problem in the code, then we address it in the code. But if it's not a problem in the code, then I don't see why it would be a problem in the general plan. I'm just trying to facilitate visual of saying, this is what it says, this is what you're proposing, we change it to, and why.
There is a goal or an objective in chapter 3. It says encourage the development of additional one-family home developments in key areas such as the city's west side to address housing shortages and to facilitate additional economic growth and opportunities. So it doesn't specifically come out and say one family or one family attached or detached.
Let me interject with a proposal here. I would submit that we change this statement and delete such as the city's west side. Delete in key areas such as the city's west side. One, because it's not totally clear what one family or single family is, because I think there are different expectations. And two, because we don't necessarily have quantitative data saying that the southeast or the northeast or central Provo or any part of the city doesn't desire or doesn't want single family home developments. So I think if we deleted that, it would actually create more ambiguity, which can be clarified in the code and doesn't recommend something that was contrary.
So it would read, encourage the development of additional single family home developments to address housing shortages. And so I'm okay with that.
Let's take a vote. Yeah, I think that's great because you're right. The southeast needs more of them and there's multiple areas.
Yeah. And we don't have any maps saying quantifiably where is the biggest lack or.
Is that a problem, Brandon, if we just strike those phrases?
No, I think it's fine. I mean, we want, I think our west side is certainly, I don't see a challenge with that, the problem with that.
Is there anyone opposed to that idea? Okay. So that would be minor edit number 2 for you guys. Hopefully we don't have too long of a list.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Any other issues with the general plan?
I have some other comments.
Okay.
In page 24, where this is a document I had open most recently, it's on design corridors. I would recommend or move that we add 1860 South / Lakeview Parkway as a future design corridor, at least from, probably from the airport to State Street, because that is a major entrance to our city and there are a lot of opportunities for improvement there.
One thing that we thought about that, we think there could be some challenges to design corridor along the east, on the east side of Lakeview Parkway, especially with the raised road over the tracks. It's going to be a challenge to try to implement design corridor standards there. I mean, we can certainly do it. I just don't see a lot developing along that section of it. But other than that, I don't see a problem with it if we want to add it. So
it's an area of town that people in the southeast frequent very regularly, and I think that they want to see some investment in that area. There's weeds there that are 3 feet tall. It's a heavy industrial area, and there's really poor or no sidewalks. It's not a safe or bikeable area. So anything we can do to improve the image and the aesthetic and the safety of that, I think, is an investment in not just Southeast Provo, but the image of the entire city.
Is this something that could wait for the gateways plan? So
that was another thought that we had
thoroughly examined at that point.
Well, it is recommended in the, at least when we started out, when Bill and I were talking about the gateways plan a couple of years ago, but I don't know why we wouldn't include it here. This is where people get off the freeway when they're driving to the airport or when they're driving into the city.
Staff actually talked about that earlier this morning, that we thought this could be something we could explore further in the gateways plan. So we wanted to take a look at that one a little closer.
Feelings of the council, Mr. Fillmore?
I think the point that Councilor Ellsworth raises is worthwhile. I think it could be easily deferred, however. Own presumption and preference would be to minimize our changes today after all the work and labor and debate that's gone into this over a long, long time, that we don't nitpick it to death today. And so that's maybe one item that we could put down the road a little bit, because I think the gateway concepts are going to give us a larger holistic picture of things. Might very well blend right into that in a very nice way.
Yeah, I'll just say this is our opportunity to update or change or tweak the general plan moving through this legislative.
Right.
Well, I don't hear a motion.
It will take staff a bit more time on that one. We'll need some help from the GIS department, because they created the design corridor map. So that's one that would have to be done a little. I mean, I can certainly make the text change between now and
Hold on a second, because Mr. Larson's talking to what you guys are raising.
Oh, I'm sorry. We were looking at the map.
The map can, that map will take a little bit more work. Not, if it was in my hands, I could go change it right after the meeting, but this one was done by Stan. And I can't commit Stan to fixing that map before that meeting. So this one will take just a bit more time to fix than the other one. And that's probably one of our considerations for putting it, considering it during the gateways process, just because it'll take a little more coordination with the GIS guys.
Yeah. So according to this, it would be from State Street out to University or the freeway.
My preference would be to wait. I don't know what others feel.
Where did these proposed design corridors come from?
They have been on the books since, trying to remember, they've been on the books for quite a while. That this document came from, it was 2009, and I think it came from 2004 before that. So I think these are 20 years old or more, a number of them. We've added a few since then, but I think the date around 2000-ish is my understanding.
Yeah, so I remember reading the proposed design corridor thing and the description of what was existing there, and I felt really insulted on behalf of my street, because it said, dilapidated, uneven architecture, no value. And I'm like, hey, that's my house. But that said, I understand why Shannon would like to have that green line of Lakeview Parkway extend from University over to the adopted design corridor. That street is just going to get more use. We were driving on it last night to pick our kid up at the gym. And if we do develop there, that right now it's nice, empty road. You can zip by it, but that's not always going to be the case. So we want to be smart about the development that we put in. But my house is not dilapidated.
Does it still say dilapidated?
Okay, well, I don't see majority support for doing that change now.
Okay. Yeah, I have some other comments.
I do think it's important, though, that we put Councilor's comment about her own house in the record. So
Honestly, we could take Third South off the proposed design corridor, because UDOT redid the street with the new street lights and everything, and it's been a huge upgrade to it. I don't know that it's necessary to still have it there. And a lot of the residential properties have been bought and painted and upgraded and everything. It's very cute, including my house.
including your house.
on the record.
Okay, Counselor Ellsworth, what else?
I'm going through my notes here. So there's a statement about recommended language stating potential for a grocery store in Southeast Provo, but the future land use map doesn't show any parcels that would accommodate that. So I'm wondering if staff has any recommendations on how to reconcile that.
Can you put the PowerPoint back up? It actually does have quite a bit of commercial designation there. And that's what this map's here to show. I think the label's getting in the way. Part of the challenge of showing you this map on one big map is like things get covered up. But when this is laid out on GIS and we start using it in our office, it's a lot more clear to us. So when I take the label off, you can see that there's 75 acres of commercially designated land along South State right there.
Okay, that's helpful. The other questions I had. Oh, on page 16 where it talks about age. This is into the demographics question. I was wondering if there's support to delete the sentence. Although college students are a key demographic in Provo, many of them will only call the city home for a few years. In my mind, that sounded like we were minimizing or close to excluding college students. And I think we wanted to be inclusive. We wanted to feel like all citizens were represented. I think if we wanted to keep that sentence, we might reframe it in a more positive light.
So I actually agree with Counselor Ellsworth on this, and I would say college students are a key demographic in Provo, and many of them will call the city home for a few years.
Or many of them will stay here for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
But many of them will not. So I don't see I think we're splitting hairs, I think, but.
Yeah, but by taking out words like although and only, then it removes that negative connotation that Counselor Ellsworth is picking up on.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So college students are a key demographic in Provo, and many of them will call Provo home for a few years. So.
Yeah.
And then.
So just get rid of although, is that?
And
although
only.
and only.
Only, although and only.
Probably add an and.
Okay. We can get that fixed.
Okay, and then page 47, housing with more bedrooms was the title. And I had a question about the statement to improve affordability for larger families with varying incomes. Provo should encourage the development of homes with 4 or more bedrooms in both single and multifamily developments. So I'm wondering what the staff's thought was there. How would we improve affordability by adding bedrooms? Because
there's a development called Willow Creek over on South State townhome complex that allows for not only batching, but it also allows for they're 4-bedroom units. And so I think what we're trying to say there is we want to encourage, products like that, where, you've got a townhome complex or a townhome that has more bedrooms in it. It's going to be cheaper to get into a townhome than a detached property. And so that's, I think, one of the main things we're talking about there.
okay. Just trying to think how we could improve the wording so that it's more clear. Are we trying to promote or housing stock in general? Are we trying to promote affordability? Are we trying to promote any kind of housing stock with more bedrooms?
I think that there is also, I kind of like what we said, because we do want more homes with big bedrooms, whether they're detached or single family, detached or attached, because I think we need both. That's kind of what I hear from the public is, hey, we need larger homes more larger homes available for people to move into. We also need those larger townhome products as well. And so, yeah, that was we wrote that intentionally.
Councilor McKay has a comment.
And we've gotten definite feedback on our surveys on that, and our statistics show that we have an extreme shortage of
Right.
4+ bedroom homes.
Right.
So here's a proposal. There's two alternatives. One, we could say to increase access or increase availability for larger families with varying incomes, ... Or we say to improve affordability for larger families, Provo should encourage the development of homes with 4 or more bedrooms and multifamily developments. But there's this incongruity between affordability and large single family homes that's not reconciled in this statement. So
I have a response.
Go
One
ahead.
thought on that. I've talked to a lot of families who there becomes a bidding war. There's just such a shortage of those homes. They sell for a lot more if you want to stay in Provo. So the 4+ bedroom homes sell for more than they need to because of the shortage.
in single family detached or attached?
Probably both. I know single family detached, but I assume it's both. It's just, availability, right?
Yeah, I'm still not connecting it. And maybe, is there any other thoughts on this? I think it would be okay to remove affordability and put access or something else.
Yeah, because it seems what you're wanting is more options or a larger supply of housing stock that has more bedrooms. Right?
If that's the intent of the statement, yeah. I don't think this is actually about affordability. I think it's about more bedrooms.
You're suggesting we simply replace affordability with access?
Or availability, yeah, to improve availability or access, either one.
I'm okay with that. Not a big deal to me. That helps. I do think there is a need for larger homes with more bedrooms in Provo.
Yeah, I'm not denying that. I think the bigger the home, the more bedrooms, the less affordable it is. But that's what I'm trying to reconcile here.
Brandon, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I don't see any problem at all with changing it to availability or.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right, I think this is my last request. There's a handful of statements that I emailed to the council that I think could be deleted because they're very specific to this point in time. And Dave Shipley brought this up last time we met, that if this is intended to be a visionary document and to guide people going forward, we might want to remove some of the soon to be outdated information. So the recommendations I had would be that we delete, let's see, something that says Provo is working proactively, engage the development community to ensure an understanding of the processes and requirements needed for review. I think that's terrific that that the city's doing that. I don't know if that's going to be relevant or guiding policy for council or staff in the year 2028. Additionally, there's comments in here, Provo startup culture, airport educated populace. Vivint began in Provo and it was named one of the most promising American companies by Forbes in 2013. Because that's 10 years ago, it's really cool information, but it's not necessarily pertinent to the year 2023 or the year 2025. So I think we could remove that. The other statements I sent the council includes the construction of the regional sports park will be a large undertaking for the city. I think that will feel outdated pretty soon to the people who are using this as a tool. Another statement was in 2022, the Provo metropolitan area had 75 Energy Star ratings. The City Hall, which opened in 2022, is net zero. Again, terrific information, but not necessarily pertinent to a strong vision moving forward. And then page 82, 1A said complete and implement a conservation and resiliency plan. Very supportive of that. I just think it's going to be outdated quite soon. So I'm trying to eliminate some of the comments or elements in here that might not be enduring.
We had reviewed your comment as staff, and we agreed with some of your points and made the changes that we felt were salient. Some of them, like complete and implement the conservation and resiliency plan, we think is an important point in the document, because there's other points and sentences that build off that one. That's still out there. We hope to have that completed, but we don't know that it will be adopted. We think it will, but we still think that that's an important point. And
I am really opposed to taking that out, actually.
Yeah, there are a few others that I can't remember all of them, but we did go through as staff. We eliminated points that we thought would date the document. There were some, though, that you just highlighted that we felt were helpful. There's some data baselines in there we didn't want to remove that reference 2019 or 2022, and we still feel like they're helpful baselines. And as far as like working to address the zone, I can't remember exactly the codes and so forth. That's still an ongoing process, and one that's still going to be salient in 2030 or whatever. So we did, it's up to you, council, but staff did go through and did try to eliminate in the last week, tried to eliminate dating references in this document.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would support you in this. I think Councilor Ellsworth, some of your suggestions have been helpful, but I like those things in there. It gives context to the plan. It shows the vibrancy and the growth and the forward-looking elements of the city. And it's not ancient history. We're not talking about pioneer things. We're talking about things just within the last 10 years or so. And I think it shows a trend that we're have that economic viability that's essential to any viable city. So I'd like to keep those in personally.
Any other comments from the rest of the council? Mr. Shipley?
Generally, I agree with the sentiment that some of this feels like it would be dated very quickly. Like the one about Vivint, there's some of them I'm like, that's just making historical reference, and I don't, whatever, leave it in, don't leave it in. It doesn't, we have some historical references all throughout the general plan that give some historical background on things, and can leave that in. Do you have any examples of ones that you guys decided to take out, though? Because they were pulling them up as quickly as they could. It seems like they were all still in there. So I just wondered if you'd give me an example of something that maybe you guys considered. And
yeah. The Energy Star one is gone. Let's see if I can pull up my comments here. I know that.
Where is the Energy Star one?
That's in chapter 9 in the resource management.
Reference to the Energy Star one that in the document I read.
They're saying they took it out.
This morning?
No, they were taken out. These were taken out before I sent them to you on, I think, was it Wednesday or Thursday of last week. There was, I'm not sure how this is, I think, in chapter 2, one that said, it used to say Brigham Young's housing policies will impact the choices of its students. It used to say something to the effect of the BYU's recent housing policies have impacted housing choices. We just reworded the statement to point out that BYU's ongoing housing policies. I wish I had the red line in front of me, but we altered that sentence to not date it. There was another. There was a reference to two new mixed zones recently having been adopted. We got rid of that reference. Just going through my comments here.
While you're thinking, I'll just voice an opinion here. I think I would sort of echo what Mr. Shipley said. I think in principle, what Councilor Ellsworth is concerned about is a good thing. We want to reduce the redundancies, but I feel like these are not substantive in terms of what we're voting on in terms of the general plan. And so I'm okay trusting your editorial response to those suggestions. If not all of them are I don't know, Counselor, I don't want to speak for Counselor Ellsworth. If you're proposing to go one at a time and have us vote on them, that's one option, but my inclination is to call it good, I guess. But I don't know what you're proposing we would do. I'm just trying to facilitate this process here.
Yeah, I don't want to go through each one and vote on each one. I don't think that's a good use of our time. I didn't want the general plan to be a snapshot in time because I don't know that that is useful to the Council of 2028. I think that they'll better be able to build off of policies that they could see were well endorsed by the community and by best practices. And so some of the information that's relevant to the year 2022 to me doesn't seem pertinent. However, we don't need to belabor the process. Those comments are an email if someone wants to update them. We have that record.
All right. Are there any other comments or suggestions about the general plan before actually vote on it tonight? What's that? You can't mumble. You have to speak up with the microphone.
I saw a little subject verb disagreement in one of the yellow edits that was flashed up on the screen in front of us. Do we want to fix that?
A subject of disagreement?
A subject verb disagreement. It's grammar.
It depends on the council. I'm just asking if anyone's making any motions, or are we done discussing?
I think we're done with substantive things.
Okay.
I'll tell them which S needs to be removed later.
Okay.
Are you looking for a motion?
We don't need a motion right now. We're just giving the staff any instructions before tonight. Okay. All right. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you.
As always, for all your hard work on this and your persistence, and Hannah as well, and others who've worked so hard on this, and all the feedback from the staff, the department directors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We acknowledge how much work this has taken, and we appreciate your patience with the legislative end of this.
Glad to be able to work with all of you on it. It's been an amazing process, and I do want to particularly thank Hannah. She's been outstanding. She's one of the great stars of the city, and just amazing. So
yeah, we know that, but so are you. All right. Okay. Closed session has not been requested, so if there's no objection, we will adjourn Provo Municipal Council meeting by unanimous consent.
Record.